betrayal and death. Today's sermon comes with a trigger warning, as it does talk about suicide. If you need to leave to give yourself space, please do so. You can head to the kitchen and make yourself a cup of tea. If you need to talk to someone, please speak with myself or May, who's down the back, after the service. So what does the word betrayal mean to you? Do you think of lovers scorned, a cheating spouse or partner? What springs to mind? According to a study by S. Rackman, the most common forms of betrayal that humans experience are harmful disclosures of confidential information. You know, when people share secrets that you don't need to know. Disloyalty, when someone is unfaithful or violates their allegiance to you. Infidelity, breaking the vows of marriage. And fourthly, dishonesty, which is lying. Betrayal, therefore, can happen not just between lovers, but between friends, family members, work colleagues, or any other human relationship. Betrayal, according to Brené Brown, is a violation of trust. But this also means that in order for there to be betrayal, there had to be trust in the first place. In John's story of Jesus' arrest and crucifixion, there are several sub-stories of betrayal. We have Peter's denial of Jesus, potentially a relatively low level of betrayal. And then we have Judas Iscariot's betrayal, which the Oxford commentator Renee Kiefer describes as treason. And if we think of Jesus as a king, the head of God's state, i.e. the kingdom of God here on earth as it is in heaven, then Judas's behaviour is totally treasonous. Judas's betrayal was high-level treasonous betrayal. So let's look at these two types of betrayals in turn. Firstly, Peter. Peter in the passage denies Jesus 3 times before the cock crows, as foretold by Jesus in John 13:36-38. John's report of the 3 incidences of denial or betrayal by Peter include, firstly, the woman guarding the gate in 18:17, where she asks him as he enters through the gate if he is one of that man's disciples, and Peter says, "I am not." The second is when Peter is standing next to the fire to keep warm in 18:25. Here, the people around the fire ask Peter if he is also one of the disciples, and Peter says, "I am not." Thirdly, in 18:26, one of the slaves of the high priest, a relative of the man whom Peter cut the ear off, asks, "Did I not see you in the garden with him?" The other Gospels describe the slave as a servant girl. Again, Peter says no. And then, of course, the rooster crows, and Peter is reminded of what Jesus said. So how is this betrayal? It's low level, sure, but there is a sense that Jesus had trusted Peter to be the rock of the church, to have his back, and Peter can't even claim to be Jesus' disciple. Brené Brown quotes bell hooks in regards to lovelessness, who says that collectively we remain unable to embrace a love ethic and allow it to guide behaviour, especially if doing so would mean supporting radical change. Fear of radical change leads many people to betray their hearts and minds. Brené goes on to say that self-betrayal tends to happen when we violate our own self-trust, usually in order to make someone else happy or in a bid for acceptance. I think what Peter was experiencing was actually self-betrayal, more than his betrayal of Jesus, because he was not true to himself and what he believed in those 3 moments. Probably because he was overcome with fear. He was probably scared of what would happen if the people hanging around the fire or the gate wouldn't accept him. Would he too end up on the cross with Jesus? However, had Peter's self-worth been higher, had he been operating out of real love, that gritty, dangerous, wild-eyed, justice-seeking love that Brené talks about, then maybe Peter would have not only been true to himself, but maybe have shown those at the gate and around the fire the love of Jesus. Maybe he would have made another disciple or 2 had he been honest. But it was and still is a risky business. There may have been a chance that he would have been ostracised and, worst case scenario, trialled alongside Jesus. But he lost his integrity and betrayed himself in the process. And secondly, Judas. Judas Iscariot's betrayal is high level, largely because it was premeditated. He'd already schemed and met with the chief priests in the lead up to Jesus' arrest, and they'd agreed on 30 pieces of silver for payment. This meeting with the chief priests is not recorded in John's Gospel, but it is in all the other 3 synoptic Gospels. Matthew's account suggests that the motivation was money. Judas went asking what they would give him, whereas Mark's Gospel makes no mention of motivation. Money was only offered by the priests after Judas offers to betray Jesus. However, Luke's account says that Satan takes Judas over, and that is the motivation, as again the money is offered inconsequentially, like in Mark's account. Also, John 13:2 says the devil had already decided that Judas, son of Simon Iscariot, would betray Jesus, backing up this idea that Satan is the motivation for this betrayal. Who, how, or why Satan took over Judas isn't told. But I think it's important, and it's good to take some personal responsibility for your actions and not just blame it on others, even if it is Satan. And simultaneously, we need to hold compassion for Judas, who is fallible, like all humans who are prone to stuff up on a regular basis. And somehow Judas has let Satan take control of him to the point of betraying Jesus. He must have gotten himself into a bad way to have ended up here. But sometimes us humans make lots of small decisions that at the time look like they could be the answer or are not a big deal, but they end up winding us up in a big, massively bad place. The other thing that makes Judas's betrayal high level is that Jesus calls him out on it well before he betrays Jesus. And Judas flatly denies it. He's dishonest. At the Last Supper, Jesus says in John 13:21-30, and it's interesting to note, It's not told to all the disciples in this account, rather just the one that was close to his heart, to Jesus' heart, the one reclining closest to Jesus that heard him say, "Very truly I say, one of you will betray me." And this one disciple, and the one disciple, the only one that hears it, asks who? And Jesus then says, "The one whom I give the bread dipped in the wine to." And of course, it's Judas. And John's account then says that the devil took control of Judas after he took the bread dipped in wine from Jesus. And then Jesus bizarrely says to Judas in front of all the disciples, "Do quickly what you're going to do." They think Jesus is referring to something else. In Luke 22 to 23, Jesus tells all the disciples that one of them will betray him. And then they all discuss who it could possibly be. And you can imagine them all saying, "Oh, could it possibly be me?" including Judas. In Mark's account, Jesus tells all the disciples, and they all say, "Surely not I." In Matthew's account, 26:20 to 25, Jesus tells all the disciples that the one who dips his hand into the bowl will betray me. It's Judas, and of course he replies, "Surely not I, Rabbi." So the betrayal, according to Matthew, suggested by Mark and Luke, also includes a blatant lie to the face of Jesus, who merely responds in grace with, "You have said so." And then later, in the Garden of Gethsemane, Judas comes with the chief priests and the Jewish police to arrest Jesus. While John doesn't, the synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, all have Judas greeting Jesus with a kiss, a culturally normal act, as a way of pointing out to the chief priests whom they should arrest. So Judas then betrays Jesus with a kiss, an intimate way of greeting a friend or family member, which again shows the level of trust that the two originally had that was being betrayed. Sometime after Jesus is arrested, the realization and guilt of what Judas has done starts to kick home. And he goes to the temple and tries to return the silver coins, which the chief priests don't want. And he ends up throwing the coins at them. He then leaves and goes and commits suicide. If you're thinking of suicide, there are other options. God offers healing and solutions. Brené Brown suggests that healing from betrayal is actually possible, but it does require significant courage and vulnerability to hear the pain we've caused without becoming defensive. Healing from betrayal, according to Brené, involves the betrayer taking accountability for their actions without making excuses or trying to explain why they did what they did. And it involves working towards making amends. The death of Jesus and the death of Judas leave us in a place of grief. But we who know the gospel story know that as we enter this period of darkness, that we know in 3 days there will be hope and light in the form of new life and resurrection. And so I pray that as you leave today, you take your hurts, betrayals, and grief, and you wait with hope that they too, by God's grace, will be redeemed sometime in the future. If today's sermon or service has brought up any issues for you, please come and talk with me or May, who's down the back, or a trusted friend. And we can pray for you or with you and help you seek further assistance if needed. Remember, you are not alone. We are here for you. Now we